I've been given a generous portion of time this morning, and I hope to use most of that to answer your questions. So hopefully you guys will come up with some as I'm talking. To that end, I met a lot of you yesterday, and I want to thank you for being so welcoming. It's been a really fun weekend. I really enjoyed it. This is my first opportunity to attend GTS because last year, of course, there wasn't one. And so a lot of the questions that you asked me yesterday, I tried to build a couple of extra slides in. So I don't usually work off notes, but I have a few because I've built some slides in at like midnight last night. So I got to remember what I was thinking. So I'm Lisa Hendy. Just a quick intro because that was a lot of your questions too. So I started out in the Park Service in 1993 as an intern in Yosemite, and then went on to Rocky Mountain National Park for 10 years as a backcountry and climbing ranger there. I worked in the winters at Arches and Canyonlands, got to be buddies with Bago and some really other great people around the Moab area. And then spent a year in Yellowstone before I was hired by Mark Yesson, who I think a lot of you guys know. So I was the prodigy of Mark Yesson, got hired permanent here at Grand Canyon. I was a canyon ranger for 7 years. So what that meant was anywhere below the rim is Canyon District, okay? The park is divided into 3 districts, North Rim, South Rim, Canyon, right? And once upon a time, there was a river district and it was its own animal, okay? That doesn't exist anymore. The folks who are doing river patrol work for me under the Canyon District. So that's one of the things I wanted to clarify for us today, okay? And we're gonna get a little more into like who's working where just to help you guys understand. And then a lot of you are like, well, when did you get back here? So what happened was I worked here for 7 years. I left in 2012. I went to Yosemite as the search and rescue and emergency services manager there for 5 years. And then I was the chief ranger at Big Bend for 3. And I still miss Big Bend in my heart of hearts. That was an amazing place. And then I went to the Smokies as the chief ranger. So that was a great time. I got to reconnect with a lot of family. And then I decided I didn't like sitting in an office. And when the opportunity came back to come back here and be in charge of the district I used to work for, and then to incorporate the river program and to try to rebuild it into something we could be really proud of, like, you know, once again, I think that was a challenge that I was really excited to accept. So my heart is in this canyon with you guys. And I think that's something that we all share and we have in common. So that's the intro of who I am. In the meantime, I think a lot of you guys had questions about who all is on the river, because now you're starting to see the Park Service on the river and you're having trouble figuring out, well, who's who. So hit the next slide for me, Emily. There you go. There's my who's who slide. So this bottom left corner, that's the patrol boats. You guys I'm sure have seen those. You can really tell them because our snouts have all got the green stripe on them, which is technically a law enforcement thing. But you can really see the box that says U.S. Park Ranger with the stripe. If you see those boxes, that's a patrol trip. Okay, that's a law enforcement box, and not all the trips will have those. And then up in the upper right corner there, that's trails. They've got a bunch of boatmen, right? And they've got a lot of times they've got those gray boats because they've got big work boats that they can carry a lot of their tools on. And then this upper left corner, this is the Colorado River Management Plan trip last year. And there's folks there for like fisheries and science, and there's administrative folks on that trip. And that's a great opportunity for us to get a lot of the park staff on there. So what are you guys, like, how are you supposed to figure all this out? Next slide. So just the organizational structure. You guys have probably heard of something called river operations, okay? And this is all in response to a lot of your questions from yesterday. So river operations is working directly for the superintendent's office. That operation is led by Dana Sullivan. And a lot of you guys might remember her. She was the deputy chief ranger for a while before she took this job. And you might recognize some of these folks, right? We've been doing something that you guys recommended to us, which is try to hire from the river community, you know? And so we are trying to hire, and Dennis was expressing his chagrin at that. He's stolen a bunch of his bogle. But, you know, but we are trying to do what you asked us to. I find it amusing. It's amusing to me that the majority of these people right now are women, given some of the history we've had. And that's just because they were the most qualified. Like, you know, I helped with interviews for all those. And we got a great crew, and we're really proud of them. These folks, their job is to support all of the park with the boats and with the logistics and with the, you know, we got a heavy equipment operator to give, you know, to drive the trucks and do all those things to get us out onto the river. Sorry, it's hard for me to hold my.
That's good.
Emily's got to help me.
Happy to.
All right. So this is a very, very condensed work chart. This is not the whole parks work chart, right? But I wanted to show you this because like this is the product of like midnight last night, but roll with it. So, you know, all the parks operational divisions have to submit proposals to Superintendent Keeble, and that's all run through a working group because, you know, it's the Park Service, got to have a committee. So there's a working group that sort of prioritizes them so that it doesn't get, you know, anything too wingnut. And then we put our missions together and we then submit them to the superintendent. And then river operations, just that previous slide, their job is to support all of these other entities as they launch their trips or their missions out on the river, okay? And so they supply the boats and they are responsible for taking care and maintaining all the boats, the transportation, the equipment, and when we need them, boatmen. But we do have boatmen in all the divisions and we have a certification process for that. And we have to like ultimately meet the same certifications and the patrol operation that you guys have to meet, okay? And that's the goal, because I mean, it makes sense, right? Like we should at least be able to do with the community, like what we're asking the guide community to do, right? So for patrol operations, that's what we're trying to meet. The standard is not as high for our administrative trips, missions. So like the trail crew boatmen, there's definitely a certification process, but they're not expected to be able to go and then help you, right? So it's a little bit less of a standard. It's more like they're still in that process of rebuilding their boatmen as well. So that's what river operations does. I oversee the Canyon District under Visitor and Resource Protection, okay? And so we are one group of folks who lean on river operations to help with logistics and support to run our missions, okay? So I do not oversee all river operations. I oversee the patrol function, okay? All right. Okay, so, and one thing that's really important when we restructured all of this is to understand that the river function is just part of, hit the clicker again for me, it's just part of Canyon District now, okay? So everything below the rim is Canyon District, right? And so when you think about that, the folks at Phantom that you meet are Canyon District, right? The folks on the trails that pop out at your beaches and say hi to your folks, Canyon District. If it's a law enforcement ranger below the rim, generally that's a Canyon District Ranger. Every now and then the South Rim Rangers venture down, but mostly it's Canyon District Ranger, okay? When we're fully staffed, there's 15 of us. Well, if you count me, there's 16, right? So that's not a whole lot of people to cover all of Northern Arizona, this giant national park, right? So we're doing our best to get out there. And the vision for the future is that we have a program that incorporates any of those people who wish to be on the river, okay? So the goal was not to have an elite group of people who all they did was boat, right? We have some of our boatmen cover the ranger stations. They cover SAR shift. They cover all the other things that Canyon District Rangers do. And Canyon District Rangers are who you get on the phone usually when you call SAR shift. Every now and then we get somebody to sub for us because we just need to have a meeting or do something different, have a project. But most of the time, you're getting one of the folks that works for me as SAR shift, okay, when you're calling. So the goal is that any of those folks who wish to train to be on the river, we will be able to train them. But imagine you're building a program from scratch and you're trying to hit a standard as high as what you guys require, right? So the only way to do that is to initially start off training just a few people who can then train their peers, right? And so we're building from scratch, so we're kind of a slow, it's kind of like a train that has to get going and it just chugs a little until it can get some momentum, okay? So we do only have 3 people right now that we're focused on training for running the motorboats and then running our oar boats. And then once we get them enough laps that they can actually be that 10 laps to be a trainer, then we will turn around and start training some of our other folks. But as we go here, I'm going to talk about what we're doing in the meantime to build that feeder so those other folks are ready when it's their turn to get trained. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's kind of what's going on right now. So right now you might see the same 3 guys out there all the time because they're our focus. And that's Hunter Ham, Ryan O'Lear, and Dan Havanek. But as we're going to get some momentum, one of the things we did this year was we hired Trevin Johnson. And he's my unicorn. He's my already qualified boatman who wanted to be a law enforcement ranger. Awesome. So we sent him to FLETC. He just graduated last week. FLETC is the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. I don't know how many of you guys know Trevin, but I get the impression he's a well-liked, pretty popular guy in this community. So anyway, so he's going to help train them. And this year, the superintendent's office supported us with a seasonal, and we hired Liam O'Neill. And he is not commissioned, he is not a law enforcement ranger, but his sole function is to help us get these guys enough laps so that we can start really, really gaining some momentum. And then we'll start having more of the Canyon district trained on these boats. And we'll have more people available to be supportive of you guys. So that's kind of the vision, and that's where we're headed. So hopefully that's helpful to you. And that kind of explains kind of the structure, because I think a lot of people were asking me questions that belied some confusion yesterday. So hopefully that helps out. You know, I noticed the title of my talk was Safety First. And that kind of made me smile when I saw it, because I was like, I don't need to tell y'all how to be safe on the river. You guys, this is your profession. There are many, many places where you know more than we do, and we respect that. And I've sought a lot of advice over the last year and a half from this community. And I think mostly what we're here to do is support you, okay? And to learn how we can do that best. And the best way to do that, to learn, is to talk to you. And so I only have about 5 or 6 more slides, I think. And we're gonna blow through them pretty quick. And then we're gonna ask you, the rest of this hour, I'm stoked I had that much time. I really want questions from you, so start thinking about it, okay? Because I wanna hear what you're concerned about and what you need from us, okay? All right, so that all said, let's see. All right, so here's some of the stuff that people expect me to show up with, so I'm gonna meet that expectation. Here's a bunch of stats, right? All right, one of the things I want to point out here though is that I put the backcountry user nights out there too. And it's because I want you to understand that our staff does all of it. It's not just the river. And not to diminish the magnitude of the river responsibility, but we've got a lot of ground to cover. And so I wanted to show you 340,000 user nights in the backcountry. That's not on the river. That's how many people are out there backpacking. And I know you guys see them on the beaches, and yes, I'm aware Monument has become a problem, and we will patrol it more. But I know I'm listening. But that all said, there's a lot of people out there that you guys may or may not ever see, and that does count the corridor, and we do oversee the corridor. So that's the Bright Angel South Kaibab corridor, and that counts Phantom. But that is not all of it. So go ahead, hit the next slide. So this gives you, I'm going to show you this even though it's not your scene, because I want you to appreciate the whole scope of what we're up to. So if you were to look at this, this is basically backcountry use trends by month. So that's not surprising to anybody. And then that upper right corner, we have that backcountry divided managerially into the corridor, South Kaibab, Bright Angel. I know a lot of times you guys, when you hear the corridor, you think river corridor. But to us, the corridor is the north-south rim to rim corridor, okay? The threshold, which is the trails that are just kind of on the edge of that corridor where people are just sort of branching out and learning how to hike in the canyon a little bit better. So they're going out to like Hermit, maybe Grandview Mesa. And then the primitive is, we're looking at Hance, Deer Creek, places like that. And then wild wilderness, that's when you start seeing people coming down routes and canyon area, okay? And if you were to take all of the threshold, primitive, and wilderness, they're actually the same number of people as we see in the corridor every year. But historically, we've only been able to patrol that with about 10% of the frequency. And that was due to staffing, right? So that meant almost all our focus, imagine for a couple years there, all our focus was in the corridor. We didn't have anybody on the river, and we didn't have enough staff to get out of the corridor. What were we really doing? But we were basically managing the superhighway from rim to rim, but we weren't patrolling the rest of the canyon. I ran into a group of guides out on a private trip last fall to Peach Creek, and they were shocked to see me out there, And I was like, well, welcome to the new age. We're starting to get staff. We're starting to get people back out there. Mm-hmm. All right, go ahead. So this is where last year I went through the schedule. I literally looked at the boxes and counted them, got it all aware so that I could give you real accurate numbers. This is where last year we spent our time. And I want you to notice that giant gray 10%. Let's see, again, that's the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. It's because we hired a whole bunch of new people. So a huge amount of time we set those guys away for 9 months to get trained to be law enforcement. I did the math on how much time it takes to become a certified boatman here and a law enforcement ranger, and you could become a United Airlines pilot faster. Yeah. It's crazy, right? So So we're hiring unicorns. We've got to either hire a law enforcement officer and train him to be a boatman, or we've got to hire a boatman and train him to be a law enforcement officer. But this is where I ask for your patience, because either way, we got a lot of training to put these people through, and it's taken us time to get that train running, okay? But if you look at that, only 7% of our time was spent on the river last year, and that's with our 3 guys trying to get out there. And it's because we couldn't get enough trainers for them, because we couldn't just launch them, right? So that's why we hired Trevin, and it's why we've hired Liam, and we're going to really focus a lot more on that this year. So I'm hoping when I come back to you next year that time and the backcountry numbers, those should go way up as well, because we're staffed. We have enough rangers to get out into the backcountry. So I'm excited to see what this year brings. I'm hoping to staff Manzanita more. In anticipation of the pipeline build, I requested 2 more paramedics. Now they're not commissioned, but they'll be paramedics. They'll be working in the corridor. And that's because with the pipeline build in 2024 down in the canyon, it's already started, mind you, up on the rims. But when they start doing the construction down in the inner canyon, there's potential to have to close the Bright Angel at times. And I think you guys are all aware of that. We haven't gotten a schedule from the contractor, so I can't answer questions about specificity. I sure wish I knew, okay, believe me. But we're prepping for it because we understand that the CAVAB's a lot harder, and we're probably gonna get more calls down there. And we've asked for help. So we've got, again, support from the superintendent's office. We hired 2 more paramedics. My hope is that that's gonna allow our rangers to get out in the backcountry more too. So we're working hard to start doing our job and cover the rest of the canyon better. So you might see them in some other places. So for the trips we did manage to get on the water last year, this is what we were up to. I'm sorry some of this got cut off, but if you look at this bottom left thing, visitor assistance, information, supplies, that's like, hey, do you have any ice or toilet paper? Or hey, we lost our this, that, or the other in the river. Can you help us? This is 99% private trips, obviously, right? Yeah, that's just how it goes. And then this SAR and EMS numbers, that's just the ones we stumbled across. That's not the SAR numbers, right? That's just how we stumbled across. But I want you to see that we're not just out there like looking for law enforcement stuff in the context that you guys are thinking. We're doing a bunch of monitoring for archaeology. We're the river camps and the monitoring, and a lot of cleanup. Like we show up on those camps and do cleanup just like anybody else. And then patrols of the side canyons. And you see it, look at the citations. 1, okay? We're not out there to beat people over the head, but we are out there to protect the place. And a lot of times, 99% of the folks we contact, they're trying to do the right thing, honestly. And education is an efficient way to get them on board to do the right thing. But right now, I want you guys to understand, because I had a lot of people, like, I guess they've had experiences in the past where there was like some beach storming that went on with the rangers that would show up. And I want you guys to know, like, the concessions does a lot of work to regulate and make sure that your cooler's in the right temp. And like, there's folks out there that do that. We're not at the moment doing much of that. We haven't been asked to. I think the feeling of the concessions management staff is that you guys are squared away and that we don't need to put our time and energy there. So when you see us roll up, most of the time, we're just gonna ask you how it's going and see if you need any help, right? Does anybody have any beat up bangs and bruises you want us to take a look at? Almost all our boatmen, actually all of our boatmen right now are either advanced EMTs or paramedics. So I'm a paramedic, Ryan O'Leary's a paramedic, and then Hunter and Dan are both advanced EMTs. So if you see them on those boats, like you got somebody who's got a weird cough or something's funky going on and you don't know what to do with it, fly them over, ask them for help, let us help take a look at stuff. We're more than happy to do that. And we're carrying reasonable ALS kits on those boats. We don't have life pack monitors and things like that, but we do have, like, I can't really do a great cardiac check on you guys right now, but we can do an awful lot to take a good look at it and offer advice. So please ask if we can help you, we will. So this is kind of what we're after. We do a ton of contact and we stop and talk to absolutely everybody we run across. So please don't take that as like we're coming and single you out. We talk to absolutely everyone. And it's because we're trying to get to know you, right? So even though we're going to be in uniforms then, and we're going to look a little bit more official than I look today, please know that they're going to come talk to you. It's not because they're worried you did something wrong. It's because we're trying to reach out. And my guys have been instructed, like, please go make friends in the river community. Like, let's learn what they need from us. And so when they come over, don't think something's wrong. It's probably not. They probably just come to say hi and see how your trip's going. Okay. All right, so a bunch of people like these numbers, so I'll throw them at you. It's our numbers for last year. Okay, So you saw how we're spending our time. Go ahead and hit the next one. So the ranger station's pretty darn busy. That's how many calls we got. You know, if you think about that, most of those are happening in the summer. There's only one ranger down there, and it's hot and it's hard, and they're responding to an awful lot of stuff. Last year, there were 342 total SARs. 47 of those came off the river, and then there were 22 when I went through the stats that were listed as beach or shore for a location. So it's hard for me to say, was that a backpacker or was that a river runner? But we picked them up off a beach or a shore. So you see that about, you know, roughly 70 or so of our SARs came off the river corridor last year. And they were for all different reasons. And we're going to hit the reasons next. Get close. Short hauls, we had 11. And 3 deployments of our rescue vessels. The rescue vessels are the Zodiacs. So that's what we call the rescue vessels as opposed to the snouts and the ore boats that you guys see out there. So we had 3 deployments of those boats last year. Go ahead. And here's where all of the SARs broke down. So this is not just river. Falls, 62%, or excuse me, 62 SARs. And so think about that. That's like, if you twist your knee on the Bright Angel, that's going to count probably as a fall. Okay. This doesn't mean like fall off the rim. This means like I tweaked myself on my way hiking somewhere. Illness is pre-existing, 45. I bet you guys see that, right? Like, you know, there's a lot of people whose bucket list includes, right? Yeah, totally. Illnesses generally, and then the heat and fatigue and dehydration, which of course is some of our bread and butter in the corridor, right? So, and the rim-to-rim crowd especially. So this photo is from a boat salvage that happened in Serpentine last year. It was a private motor that flipped there and mangled some things. So, all right, go ahead. All right, so very specific to River Patrol. Go ahead. All right, so here's a bunch of the work that we've been trying to do to get trained up to be better supportive of you, okay? And, you know, when you've only got like 3 of those guys plus me, like this is actually quite a bit of stuff, right? I mean, think about how many people we're talking about here. We did a lot of cooperative work with river operations because they were hiring new people and getting them trained too, right? So there's a lot of work here where we were working very closely together. And I think of all the divisions, protection probably works the most closely with river operations. I mean, I'm in that boat shop a couple times a week. Dana and I go for breakfast once a month. It's kind of an excuse to eat breakfast at the El Mar, really, but it's just a really great opportunity for us to stay on the same page. I helped her hire all her boatmen. I was on the hiring panels for all of them. So I feel very connected to that operation because we are so interwoven. It's really important. And sometimes they show up on our trips too. We've been doing a bunch of work with the rescue vessels, and this is where we're starting to see, remember I told you at the beginning, we're trying to bring more of the rest of the Canyon staff in to start getting them fed into this program. So we're offering, we put all of them through our motorboat operator class last year. This past winter, we put all of them through packraft training and canyoneering training. And this spring, we've got a rescue vessel operator training at Badger. So for the next wave of rescue vessel operators to get that beginner group going, and then we'll have the more experienced rescue vessel operator training. So we're going to do it twice this year. And those guys will be at Crystal to keep their proficiency up. And then you might see us running around in Lee's Ferry. We're going to try to get fixed dates every month where we're just doing proficiency for Swiftwater down at Lee's Ferry. So if you see our boat in the water down there playing around in the riffle, we'll try to be super polite and get out of your way and let you get all past, and then we'll be up running and trying to practice a bunch. So please be patient with us, but that's how we're going to train. And you'll see us down at Badger some too, doing the same thing, just working hard to get better and better from a rescue vessel standpoint to be proficient, to be able to help more. Okay. All right, and then there's all the other efforts to get further out into the backcountry, like I said, with the canyoneering and the pack rafting. The next one, the smaller craft. I want to point this slide out. I know Ed's here, so I'm gonna make sure he sees this one. So this is the permits for river-assisted backcountry travel have been climbing. And in 2022, so this is your pack rafting, right? They've been climbing big time. And I'm pushing hard to get us out on the water more and more with smaller craft. And right now, we're using pack rafts, and you're going to see us out there. And pack rafts are part of our river mission profile. So, like, I'm going to be out there in May for a week in the upper half, and you'll see people out there on these smaller boats. These are the same kind of rangers that are pulling up in an ore boat. They just haven't been trained on the ore boats yet. Like they're the next ones in the feeder pipeline, right? So please understand that like these guys are just like the guys that are showing up on the motorboat. They're the same type of ranger. They're Canyon District Rangers. They're all working for me. Okay. If it's a law enforcement ranger, pulling up on these. Now, our staff in the backcountry office, they are also doing a great job of doing some patrols out there just to help us get eyes on things. And it's awesome work that they do. They are not commissioned. And so if you see them, they're not commissioned, that's probably from our backcountry office staff, which is totally different. Those are the folks issuing permits all through the canyon. And we need their help. They're such a force multiplier. But the law enforcement rangers may show up. We've got these little guys, which are great when you're canyoneering because they don't weigh anything. But we've also got some of the alpaca rafts, a little bit more beefy. And my hope is to incorporate some kayaks in the near future. We used them for the advanced swiftwater class we just did down here as downstream safety. And I have this dream of being able, when we fly in with that rescue vessel, to put kayaks out on the beach with the first couple boatmen so that they can get downstream as downstream safety quickly, and then have the rescue vessel come in on the next sling load and the boatman for that, go ahead and get it rigged and ready and get on the water. But my hope would be that at some point we get proficient enough, we can spit a couple kayaks out super fast with that first load that comes in and have people downstream until we can actually address the bigger issue with the rescue vessel. So anybody who's ever seen that get deployed, we fly in with a boatman and a crew member, and then the rescue vessel, the Zodiac, will come in on a sling usually, and then they'll assemble it on the beach and get going. And my hope is that that first load that brings in that boatman is going to have a couple kayakers on it someday here soon. So we're trying really hard to get out those smaller vessels. It's also the gateway for all those other canyon rangers that want to ultimately get trained to start getting out on the river and get super familiar with it. So we're acutely aware of our responsibility to you guys. Like we know that we are here to support recreation. And I was thinking, as Vincent was talking yesterday, the other thing that we're also here, like we have two missions, right? Is support the public as they're out there enjoying the national park. But the second one that we share in common with you and with all the native tribes is to protect the place, right? That's our big thing. I mean, that's in our name, resource protection, right? So that is something we have in common, and we're very much aware of it. And we know we're in a building phase, and we know that we need your support. So you'll see me a bunch. I come to everything y'all invite me to because I'm trying to make sure you know who I am, and I'm here to support you. The last thing I want to hit on is some of the lessons learned from the after actions. I'm gonna set this down now because this I've given a couple times. I know my notes now. Is some of the lessons learned from the incidents that we've had the last couple of years. Where do I point that? There we go. Okay. So I went and did after action reviews with all the outfitters who have had these mass casualty incidents the last couple of years. And this is sort of a culmination of everything. I presented this to the outfitters meeting last fall. It's the same slide. So there's no surprises here, but these are the things we're working on. So direct communications with SARSHIP for the managers of the companies. So that means that when you guys have an accident down there, and you fire off that Garmin inReach or whatever, we know about it, but sometimes because they're your emergency contact that's programmed into it, your manager knows about it before we do. Sometimes it hits them first. Because those signals go to the Air Force Rescue Center, and the Air Force Rescue Center figures out who's the closest 911 service, and then they tell us. So that little bit of telephone that goes on, your manager bypasses, it goes direct to them. So sometimes they know before we do. And what happens is they have to call our dispatch because that's the contact number. So our shift changes every day. It's a different person. Sometimes we trade it off a couple times during the day. Like if I got to go to a meeting, I'm like, Emily, can you cover our shift for a couple hours? I got to go to a meeting, right? And so, you know, having any individual phone number isn't helpful. So it's always dispatch. Well, what was happening was the managers were calling dispatch and they weren't getting put right through the SAR shift because if they weren't on the emergency, the dispatcher was busy with the emergency and they were like, you're going to have to hold. And they just call them off. And what they don't know is that they're part of the response. So we think we've corrected that. And what should happen now is the manager should say, I'm the manager of X company that's involved in this accident. I need to talk to SARSHIP. They should get SARSHIP right away and should transfer them. And then SARSHIP is supposed to give you their work cell number right then and there. And that way the rest of the communications go direct. Okay. When you guys hit your inReach, what happens is that goes to our dispatch center, and then they send that to me if I'm SARSHIP, and then the next couple of messages you get back from the park, they're going to have a different phone number that's linked to, and then I'm going to be talking to you from my cell. You're going to get SARSHIP directly. So that's the goal, is that we're tying everything straight to SARSHIP, and pulling dispatch out of the middle of it because it was adding some confusion. And keep in mind, our dispatch center doesn't just serve Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon's busy enough. They've got 4 other parks, okay? And so they are hammered, and often they're alone in there. And so when they've got a whole lot going on, getting put on hold is really, I get put on hold daily. So they're like, yeah, you can hold. So please know that's not a lack of love. It's just the reality. Once you're tied in, all of our SAR efforts need to be in cooperation with the guides, the manager, and the company personnel. The way that we're training our sergeant rangers to think of this, and hopefully every ranger that's responding, is that you are like a cooperator. Like if I went to a car accident in the park and we had asked DPS to come help us with the investigation, they would be a partner, right? Like that's not us saving them. If the wreck happens in Tucson, just south of the boundary, and we go out to help, like, we're there to help each other. We're on equal footing, right? And there's a lot of places where that needs to be the case because these are your boats and you know what you want done with them. And you know what's best with your company. There's going to be a lot of coordination with the managers. Now, I got to tell you, the Park Service still does retain control of that scene. And we're going to evaluate the priorities for the park. But I want you to know you're going to have a seat at that table as a partner and not as like, oh, we're coming to rescue you, as if it was a private boatman. Does that make sense? You guys understand the difference there? So the goal is to do it in cooperation. And the hope is that the outfitters are understanding that sometimes there's a lot of other priorities going on in the park. Right now, just this last week, we ran 3 to 4 medevacs a day because it's been great. In the summer, it was not uncommon to run 5 or 6. So we tend to triage them, and once we have one student stabilized, we might have to divert and go take care of something else. Sometimes that happens. All right. Protocols for additional supporting aircraft to clarify. So supporting aircraft meaning DPS, okay? We don't generally fly commercial operators into the canyon, so Classic and Guardian. We will occasionally land them at Phantom, but most of the time we don't fly those guys in. We use DPS, or we occasionally use the military. So if our aircraft aren't available, how hard is it to get supporting aircraft? I want you to remember though that DPS covers all of northern Arizona. So it's not, our aircraft is very specific to the Grand Canyon. So a lot of times we call DPS and they don't have anything available. So please understand it's not a given that if the park can't show up, DPS is going to. All aviation inside the canyon is under the purview of the park. So DPS won't come in without coordinating with us. So there's no benefit in calling them separately. Okay. You need to call the park and let us do that because we coordinate that. It could be incredibly dangerous because if we're responding to and we have multiple aircraft coming in the same location, we've got to know. And so please don't think that, oh, well, DPS could come get us and do that instead. Call the park and let us help coordinate that. Okay. Salvage operations need to be heavily coordinated with NPS support. Okay. So right now, I know several of the outfitters are launched this morning to go down the river and kind of like brainstorm ideas for how you guys can support each other when these big incidents are happening. And I think that's really important. And I sat down with Cam last night and I said, okay, and when you get done, like we're going to sit down and figure out how we can help facilitate that. So that, again, we're working together to build that response plan for some of these accidents we've seen. I know nobody had seen anything like that, and all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of them. I'm superstitious. Bad things happen in threes. Maybe we're done, right? We've had 3 bad ones. Maybe we're done. But I'm also one who likes to plan for the worst and hope for the best. So we will, when they get back off that trip and they have come up with what you guys think that you need to do to support each other as operators, then my plan is to sit down with them and with Azra and some of the other companies and whoever actually wants to come. Dennis and I were talking about it this morning, like let's figure out how to coordinate that and let's build that plan so that we're building it together so that the park is able to coordinate it for you and provide you the logistical support to affect that plan. Does that make sense? And then last but not least, the emotional trauma. That may not be the last one, but one of the last ones is emotional trauma all needs to be a higher priority. And so in your packet, you guys got that card that talks about the different, it's like green, amber, red in the emotional stress chain. Take that seriously. Responder Alliance is a pretty darn amazing organization. And I've had the privilege of working with Law and Gladry a couple of times for SAR responders and some of our law enforcement stuff. And it is legit. And I will tell you, after 30 years of emergency services, I've hauled a lot of dead bodies out. and I've made a lot of death notifications. And there's nothing worse than the wail of a mother who just lost her child. I can still hear every one of them if I put myself in that place. The slideshow is heinous, okay? And so my hope is that you never, ever have a slide in your slideshow. If you have 1 or 2, that'll be enough to haunt you. You get 10 or 12, that's bad. And then 30 of them, like 30 years worth, like I need counseling, I'm pretty sure. So, but my point is take that seriously, because what ends up happening is if you bury it, the analogy I like to give is like, it's kind of like is if you had a book and you have a closet and you have a bunch of photo albums and these photo books, and you deal with that incident. As a responder, I deal with a lot of them, and I put it all in this photo book, and I'm like, okay, and I put it on the shelf, done dealing with it, right? Well, if I just throw those books up there, you guys have ever had a closet in the shelf, you know what's going to happen, right? Like eventually you're going to throw one up there, and then all of them fall down on your head, right? Because you have not organized and put them away properly, right? Whereas if you put them away properly, and take the time, every now and then you pull one of those photo albums down and you look at it. I'm like, okay, I dealt with that again, and I put it back. But if I just huck it up on the shelf and don't do anything with it, or I don't do that carefully, then eventually they all hit me, right? And that's kind of what happens with these incidents, okay? So if you've been doing this a long time, I'm one of the paramedics here, and so I fly in on medevacs a lot, and sometimes even if you don't have the giant mass casualty, you guys have some tough incidents out there, right? And if you don't deal with them well, that's what will happen. I'll tell you from my own personal experience, okay? So take that card out and really read all of that. I heard a couple of you talking out in the parking lot, made me smile. They're like, what shade of green do you need today? I need to be in green. I was loving that conversation. I was sort of eavesdropping and I was smiling. I was like, yes, that's what you need. So support each other and use that. It's a great conversation tool. Like, you walk up to somebody in their boat and they're sort of looking down and you're like, where you at? And they're like, man, I'm in the yellow. I'm in the yellow. And you know what that means? You don't have to go into some big diatribe about your inner feelings, right? And then you can work with each other. And so use it as conversation tools. It's helpful. But those cards, take them seriously. Take them home and read them. Pay attention to them. All right. And then last, external communications coordinated and released with extreme care. Everybody's got an inReach, right? Like, I mean, every freaking, do you guys have this experience where like all of your passengers like show up with them too? All talking to their family and everything. And so before you can even call your manager, like your wreck is on Facebook. I mean, it's unbelievable how fast. I had a river private trip just a couple weeks ago. They had somebody with a knee injury and they wanted to get medevac, but they couldn't because of the weather. So they're at Tuck Up, and I tell them, like, we can't come today, the weather. And I find out on Facebook that they have moved downstream and they're somewhere in transit. And I told them to stay put. I was like, if we get a window, we're coming, right? No, they just couldn't. And so the only reason I knew that they were not still sitting at Tuck Up was because they posted it on, like, their friends, they told them, and then they posted it on Facebook. Thank goodness one of my Rangers caught that. And I was like, well, thank God we didn't launch, and like now we're hanging out, flying around Tuck Up for no reason. Those flights are not safe. Like, that is a dangerous thing for us to be doing if there's nothing going on. So my point is, we're having trouble containing the communication. Another trip can go ripping past you guys and see whatever's going on with you and send that out to the world. And we don't have any control over it, okay? But the commitment we have to the outfitters is that we will not release anything without coordination with them. So my ask of you is professionalism, is don't punch out a whole bunch of information about what just happened on your trip, even to your friends, even though I know the hardness of that. Like, I have been in situations where I really want to reach out to a friend because this horrible thing just happened to me. And it's going to take the park several hours to coordinate and get all that information out. And if you've just been through something tough, like, you might really feel good to reach out to somebody. But man, if they turn around and throw that up on Facebook, let me tell you what's happening to your poor outfitters. Is like, even the ones that aren't involved, like, it goes out into the world, right? And then it gets shared a million times. And then the phones ring off the hook at every single outfitter for everybody who's got anybody in the entertainment that day, right? And some of these other outfitters, they didn't even know anything happened. They're like, wait, what? And so you can only imagine the chaos and the horror and the scaredness and everything that ensues. So please, be professional, work with each other, support each other in those situations. And then once we've got all the information out there, from an actual coordinated release with your outfitter, please, let us get that done right, because otherwise we don't serve those families well. If there's been a fatality on the river, you don't want to hear about that from Facebook, right? Like, if your loved one is the victim, you don't want to hear about that. You want somebody to show up at your door and take care of you. That's what we're trying to coordinate. And if they live 17 states away, it takes a little time. So be patient and help us out with that piece. And then we're going to have to live with the fact that we can't control the visiting public, but maybe wrangle your passengers and try to have a good conversation with them about it. Okay. Do what you can to help us with this, because it's causing a little bit of chaos. It's causing a lot of heartache for the outfitter managers. Okay. All right. All right. So I'm going to leave that there because that's got my contact info. And then I'm going to ask y'all to turn the lights back on because this darkness thing's creepy and I can't see anybody.
Got about 15 minutes.
That's great. All right. So we saved some time for questions. Great. We're at. Yes, McKenna. Woo, okay.
Can you repeat?
Yeah. So she asked me how many river trips do we have? So first of all, we have to call them missions. And I'm terrible about mixing that up and not saying that correctly. But again, given our history, we try not to make it sound like this is a luxury cruise on our part. So for the patrol staff right now, we've got 1 to 2 a month through the summer. And a little bit of that has to do with how many boats do we have in service, right? Because we share them with the other operations. So my goal is to have our trainers, Liam and Trevin, sending out with Hunter and Dan and Ryan at least once, if not twice a month. And the goal would be, but Trevin's still got to get through his field training. So he's got a couple months to go. But the goal is to just split those trips and have one out every 2 weeks for each pay period. And then there will be a whole bunch of random kayaking and pack rafting going on out there. You'll see it out there that way. Yes, sir.
I'm on the board of Frank Hendy Private Boaters Association. And I'm curious, do you have a lot more calls for private boaters than you do for commercial operators?
Exponentially when you take into account the numbers. Yes. Yes. Mostly SAR, mostly legitimate SAR. Like, I mean, it's not like they're, it's not wing nuttery, generally. It's generally,
Less knowledge,
less knowledge and less
Yeah.
supervision. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say they're doing anything grossly irresponsible. And quite frankly, the citations we write to privates are often life jacket related in the flats when it's hot. Like that was the one citation you saw up there from our patrol staff that was actually on the water was their life jacket, So yeah, I would say, but when you look at it proportionately to like, here's how many river rowers there are that are commercial versus private, and then you look at the numbers of SARs, yeah, it's quite a bit more. Yes, sir. Yeah.
What do you see district's role as or have private or commercial boaters that are?
Oh, to be on the lands over there. Okay, so that's a sticky one, and honestly, I'm excited to hear what Ed has to say about a lot of that. But so the question was, when you're on tribal land, what are you training your rangers to do when these people don't have a permit for like the lands, right? So, and this goes back to a lot of what Vincent had to say yesterday, right? Like we have a common goal to protect the place, right? And so we want everybody to be respectful. Now, if the question is, where that historic high water mark is, where the park has historically said this is our boundary, we're going to enforce that as if it's in the park. But if people are headed up the side canyons, we're going to educate them and say you need a permit to be up there. Okay, and that's usually enough. Honestly, we don't write a whole lot of tickets because 99% of the people are trying to do the right thing. They're down here to enjoy themselves. They're not down here to trash the place. Okay, so just our presence, my experience, and telling them that if they don't have that permit, that's usually enough to deter them. And so that's kind of where we are. In the future, if anything changes with where that boundary is, that might change things. But we receive our direction for how we approach law enforcement issues from the superintendent and down through the chief ranger's office. And right now, they talked about the core team yesterday. There's a whole lot of conversations going on about how that's going to look. And it's my hope that we'll get some real guidance on law enforcement posture, especially working alongside the qualifying moving forward. So right now, it's a message of be respectful. And here's where the park sees the boundary at the moment, right? And that's the basic principle. And honestly, it's pretty rare. We see it, honestly. So, all right, next one. Yes, sir.
Can you describe again the process of receiving in-reach?
Yeah, absolutely. So he asked about the process for receiving an in-reach. Okay, so you hit the button. All right. So here's the deal. if you just text people, even if I have your inReach number or your inReach email, I can't text you or write you without your permission. Okay, like I can't just randomly send a message to you. So we tell you to hit that button. It's important that you do it. Even if you're sending messages to your manager and you're like, hey, call the park, we've had an accident, right? Hit the button because it does two things. That message is going to go to two places. It'll go to whoever you have as an emergency contact on that thing, and it'll go to the Air Force Rescue Communication Center. That's who coordinates this. And actually, in fairness, inReach has its own coordination center. So if it's specifically that branch, it's Garmin, it's going to their comm center. But they have a comm center. It's a lot of ex-military guys, right? And it goes, then they figure out who the closest 911 center is. And if it's in the park, it'll come to our dispatch. And it'll show up as a pin drop. I should have actually downloaded that slide. Next time I come out, we'll do that to show you what it looks like. But I get a pin drop with exactly where you are, okay, where that thing went off. Now, if you move, okay, but there's telling you now. Anyway, if you move,
Take the pin with you.
take the pin with you, hit it again. There's nothing wrong with hitting it again, okay? Hit it again. But no, seriously, so you hit the pin drop, and then what'll happen is I'll get another message just a couple seconds later. These are coming in as emails to our dispatch center that says, and here's what we know, right? And it'll be like the message of here's what we know, okay? And then what'll happen is you should get, it'll take a little time, maybe there's some time involved here, but then at some point you'll get a message from one of the Starship Rangers and it'll say, this is Lisa Hendy with NPS Search and Rescue. You're gonna communicate with me directly. Here are my questions. Because what happens is initially, a lot of times the AFRCC will write you and say, what's going on? Because you just hit a button, you know, they don't know. And you'll tell them, it's like, I got a 54-year-old female with a twisted knee. Okay, great. Okay, well, I'll have that much information. So I will come back with, you know, are you prepared for an aircraft? Are you requesting an aircraft? And how much does your patient weigh? Okay, because of the aircraft, not because I'm just nosy. Okay, so okay, so that's how it works. And then that's what we get. And then hopefully back and forth between Starship at that point. Now, if I know this is a commercial outfitter, if I haven't already heard from the company, I'm probably calling the company at that point. I mean, like, are you guys aware this is going on? Most of the time, they know the same time or sooner, because when you hit that button, again, it goes to the emergency contact and to the AFRCC. So the emergency contact is your manager. Now, if the emergency contact is your wife, Jason, you hit that button, and then she calls me while I'm on vacation in Europe, freaking out over you. So be careful who you put on there, because if you're going to use that for your passengers, you know, then that emergency contact is going to freak out because they assume it's you, right? So be wise if it's your personal one, who you put there, or at least educate them that it may not mean that you are in trouble personally, because you get a lot of scared significant others of boatmen who have used their inReach to get help for the passenger. So heads up on that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering if you could clarify, because in years past, please clarify what your preferred protocol is in an incident, because in years past, we've always been instructed to call dispatch, and what I'm gathering is that the discussion about inReach is because it's there and people are pushing the button and how that works, but could you clarify what the preferred protocol is?
Yeah, so she's asking about preferred protocol for asking for help, for calling dispatch. So I will tell you that if you have a satellite phone and it's working, that's gravy. Like, I'd love that. That would be great, right? But like, that's just such an ideal, perfect world. It just never happens unless you're like so Greek. So let's just be real. Like, the inReach is out there. It's a fantastic tool, or any of the tools that do the same thing. So I don't mean to be like brand specific, but that's what we use. So I'm used to thinking about it that way. The Apple phones is going to be really interesting to see how that works, because they're about to have satellite capability. I have no information on that yet. We haven't seen one yet. No, it's just a matter of time. There's probably one going on right now. So we'll see where that goes. But if what we have is an inReach and two-way texting, but if you have a satellite phone and you can call our dispatch center, that's the preferred thing, because it's just real-time talking, right? There's no delays. That would be the ideal. But if your phone's not working, the inReaches are. Does that clarify it for you? Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have a comment on that. Maybe same realm, but I was working at last year. Dispatch, whoever was on dispatch, asked me to communicate with him through Henry, even though we had already established. And then I wasn't getting messages. We got a lot of messages back from him, like after the helicopter landed and notification of. I got messages from like hours previously asking me about our patient. And I guess one thing that was challenging for me was I did try to call him at one point. He was really short with me, and I understand there's a lot going on your end, but I also was like, you have phone contact, please
Yeah.
communicate, because I am in a place, and case in point, like the messages that we're trying to send to each other
Weren't going back and forth.
later, so there was actually no point of contact.
Yeah, and I can't speak to the specific situation, but I will say, you know, Starship does try. I mean, our dispatchers are trying really hard. They get you your phone number. It's sometimes hard to call back down to a satellite phone. They are trained when they get an emergency call and they're going to try to hand off to Starship. Before they hand off, they get all of that information in case the call drops. And they will ask you if you have an inReach to hit the button, because at the bare minimum, if that's because our experience is on our end is that the satellites move and then your satellite phone doesn't work, right? But the inReach will continue to try to send until it hits, right? And you experience that because like 2 hours later, right? Not convenient, but it still kept trying to send, right?
Yeah, I mean, for example, like, we were sitting there wondering, we were like, I don't know when, we have no idea when. I already got pretty clear that he didn't want me calling him anymore. And then helicopter comes for fully talking, and didn't need it. And then 30 minutes later, it's like, the bird is on its way.
Yeah.
Thanks.
On the injury, if you don't go in, what it is with the computer, it will not communicate as well. So you need to make are plugging them into the computer, getting them syncing them. If it doesn't do that, it won't communicate.
Yeah, and that could very well have been the case. I mean, I can't speak to that situation, although I will tell you it is not uncommon for our dispatchers to try to push you to Starship quickly. Because again, like you have no idea the days that they have in there. I can't even describe it to you. And they're monitoring 7 channels. If it's fire season, they have the fire crews too. They've got 4 parks. And yeah, it's ungodly. I would not want that job. God bless them. So it is not uncommon for them to try to push you to Starship quickly. And I can't speak to that specific situation. It seems like getting the satellite phone number would have been an ideal scenario. I'm sorry that
That
happened.
was like, from your end, how busy it is, and just like, but I understand what's happening. I guess that's the deal.
Yeah. They're short with us too. I mean, it's not because they're bad people. It's because they're like, yeah, okay, bye. You know? You know? So they're trying to push you to Starship because Starship is, that's why we have a Starship, right? It's because our dispatch center is overrun. And so there has to be someone who understands the intercan well to be there for you. All right, I think we got time for one more question. Okay. Yes, sir.
Because a lot of the private voters are looking almost all of them with one of the updating services. Are you doing sort of similar talks and outreach to the leaders, to
The primary
to try to
contact.
get these messages to their private voters?
Yeah, the primary point of contact for the private voters are the gentleman in the back of the room right here, right? Like that's the folks doing the checkout. This is the Lee's Ferry staff back here. So if you guys haven't had a chance to say hi to them, welcome fellas, good to see you. So yeah, so these guys are their primary points of contact. And that's one of the reasons that they came today was to kind of hear about some of this stuff. And so my hope is that they'll include that when they're talking to the private voters as well. But I know that the communication component is a big piece of that talk, so.
Yeah, they spend a lot of time talking to their outfitter.
Mhm.
The guys, the people that rent and much more time than they probably spend.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true.
So what is you guys' protocol? So incident happens in the canyon, big one happens, stuff like that. Like, I mean, how long before you guys make an official release statement, things like that? Do you wait for the crew to come out the water?
Nope, we wait until the family's been notified. And I mean, we're make sure, right? Like last year, I can't remember the name, so I was gonna throw this out there, but last year with the fatality at Bedrock, there were like 2 Steves on the trip. And we wanted to make absolutely sure we didn't know the right, notify the family of the wrong Steve, right? Like, I mean, there's things like that. Like you gotta be super careful. Family notifications, guys, is one of the hardest parts of our job. It's awful. So yeah, so we're gonna wait till that happens and then we'll let the company owner communicate back to you guys when that notification's been done and there's actual releases out there. And then, you know, they will provide you with guidelines for what they're feeling is comfortable for them, for you guys to be communicating out. Like, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna dictate any of that, because that's really between you and your
Yeah,
outfit.
just following up on that, like, I mean, we've had instances where there's been leaks that have happened early.
Mhm.
And is there investigations going into that, like, trying to nip that in the bud? And-
You know, we have tried to figure out where those are coming from.
Yeah,
And again, because absolutely everybody, I mean, it's incredible, the number of people who have those capabilities, it's really hard to figure out. Was somebody scanning our radio channels, or was that somebody on the beach feeding them information? Or, and like,
there's
it's,
literally been photos that have been leaked and stuff
I
like
know,
that, but
and I
it's
know,
super early, so.
I hear you.
I was involved with Bedrock and also some other, ones that gone down, and it's just, I mean, they have, people, not knowing what's going on in a situation, literally within hours.
Oh, believe me, I get it. I mean, because it burns us bad, because you want to see an angry outfitter, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we don't like it
I would
either.
hope that, we were looking into it, trying to figure out what that's happening.
Yeah.
When people are getting aerial photographs, public on.
Yeah, and I don't know where those are coming from.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, because sometimes they're showing up before I've seen them. And so I don't know where they're coming from. So it's totally valid. Yeah. Okay, well, I need to turn the mic over, and especially because it's like my boss's boss. But I'll be around through lunch. So if you guys have any more questions, these are all great. Appreciate you. And thank you again for being so welcoming. And be patient with us. We're trying to get back up to speed, but we're here for you, and we're here to protect the place. So let's do it together. Okay?